Welcome to this training about incorporating environmental justice principles and requirements into the sociocultural effects evaluation process. Facilitating equitable outcomes is part of a Florida Department of Transportation video series providing guidance for sociocultural effects evaluations for transportation projects. If you have viewed the first part of Facilitating Equitable Outcomes, you'll know that the training has 3 parts. From Part 1, you'll also know about the foundations of environmental justice and its role in transportation decision-making. In this video, Part 2, we'll explore the scope and key definitions that apply to environmental justice analysis. The next video, Part 3, presents a methodology for a project-level environmental justice analysis that incorporates concepts presented in Parts 1 and 2. With that, let's start reviewing the information. We'll start out with the objective of environmental justice analysis, which is to assess the extent that potential project effects would be experienced differently among population groups in the study area and to identify ways to resolve any disparities. Through the analysis, we seek to learn about potential adverse effects with explicit consideration of the affected community's demographic makeup. The Environmental Justice Executive Order, reviewed in Part 1 of the training, applies equally to the processes and products of planning, that is, project screenings for the development of long-range plans and work plans, project development, design, construction, and operations and maintenance. Environmental justice issues that are not addressed in planning could arise during project development or later when they are more difficult to resolve. In later project phases, changes in the community over time may necessitate another look at potential environmental justice issues. The topics investigated during an environmental evaluation provide a comprehensive description of study area conditions that could be affected by a project. Any project effect that could have a negative consequence on human health or the environment should be considered in the light of environmental justice. This includes effects associated with the natural, cultural, physical, and sociocultural environments. During an environmental evaluation, there is shared responsibility by project team members to assess the potential for environmental justice issues and to find solutions to those issues as appropriate while investigating the range of potential environmental effects. While effects related to any of the environmental issues could have environmental justice implications, some are more commonly associated with transportation actions. For example, poor air quality and excessive noise have correlations to human health. Effects to the natural environment, such as water quality degradation, could have direct social consequences where an environmental justice population uses an affected water body for sustenance or recreation. The sociocultural effects evaluation process provides key inputs to the environmental justice analysis. Steps 3 and 4 of the process, shown in the flowchart, are the starting points for environmental justice analysis. During Step 3, the demographic character of the study area is analyzed. The analysis indicates who is present in the study area, including low-income households and minority groups. This demographic analysis should also inform the evaluation of the cultural, natural, and physical environments. In Step 4, potential sociocultural effects are identified. If these steps indicate the possibility for environmental justice issues, we would go into more depth to understand how adverse effects would be distributed amongst the study area population, the severity of those effects, and if any would be felt disproportionately by minority or low-income populations. So what does adverse effect mean relative to environmental justice analysis? Under the DOT order cited at the bottom of the slide, it refers to the totality of significant individual or cumulative human health or environmental effects. Adverse effects may include, but are not limited to, those listed on the slide. The full definition for adverse effect, including a listing of effect types, may be found in the DOT order. In environmental justice analysis, our mission is to determine if any of these types of effects, either individually or collectively, might rise to the level of disproportionately high and adverse. A disproportionately high and adverse effect is defined in the Environmental Justice Executive Order as an adverse effect that is predominantly borne by a minority population and/or a low-income population, or will be suffered by the minority and/or low-income population and is appreciably more severe or greater in magnitude than that suffered by the non-minority and/or non-low-income population. The first part of the definition speaks to the proportional distribution or sharing of the adverse effect, and the second part relates to the severity of the effect. The severity of a project effect can be influenced by past actions, so the environmental justice analysis considers whether the community has been impacted before. Prior impacts could be transportation related or otherwise, as executed by public entities or private entities. For example, the community may have suffered from a municipal wastewater treatment plant or at the hand of an industry that caused groundwater contamination. We consider past actions because the layering of adverse effects can raise the severity of a project effect, that is, the cumulative effect on a community. At the heart of environmental justice and related non-discrimination legislation is fair distribution of the benefits and impacts of federal programs, policies, and activities. Some examples of common project benefits are listed on the slide. For environmental justice analysis, benefits are considered in two ways. First, project benefits are considered for their ability to offset or reduce the severity of adverse effects. For example, addressing a chronic crash location might justify relocating a neighborhood market to make room for intersection modifications and safer conditions. Second, we consider the project benefits that would accrue to environmental justice groups and the general population in the study area to determine whether benefits would be equitably distributed. We know from our review of the Environmental Justice Executive Order that the focus of environmental justice is minority populations and low-income populations, but we also need to know how these populations are defined in the context of the order. The DOT order for environmental justice provides specific definitions. 4 racial groups and 1 ethnicity are included in the definition for minority, including Black, Hispanic or Latino, Asian American, American Indian and Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander. There are 2 thresholds in the NEPA guidance to help determine what constitutes a minority population. The first is straightforward. The minority population of an affected area is greater than or equal to 50%. The second threshold is subjective. It provides that a minority population is present when the percentage minority of an affected area is meaningfully greater than in the general population or another appropriate unit of analysis, such as a reference community. Meaningfully greater is not defined in the NEPA guidance. However, a 2012 Federal Highway Administration training suggests that if a block group's minority population is 10 percentage points or higher than the general population, then the block group's minority population would be considered meaningfully greater. I'll talk about what constitutes a general population in a moment. And the last thing I want to add about identifying a minority population before we get into Part 3 methodology is that all racial and ethnic minority groups must be combined in a single data set for this analysis. Low income is defined in the DOT order for environmental justice as a person whose household income is at or below the Department of Health and Human Services poverty guidelines. A low-income population is any readily identifiable group of low-income persons who live in geographic proximity. Unlike the NEPA guidance on what constitutes a minority population, there is no quantitative definition of what constitutes low-income population, only the meaningfully greater test. So, the 10 percentage points or higher measure of meaningfully greater is also used to identify a low-income population. In the environmental justice analysis, minority data is analyzed separately from low-income data. This is because a minority population may be of any income level, and a low-income population may be of any racial or ethnic composition. Minority and low income are different population characteristics that must be kept separate in the analysis. An environmental justice population can also be a geographically dispersed or transient set of individuals when the group would experience common exposure to a project effect. Also, a relatively small minority or low-income population, such as one below the 50% threshold mentioned earlier, must not be ruled out for potential disproportionately high and adverse effects. For example, say the photo on the left is a project area that was determined not to have a minority or low-income population per the threshold. The yellow box, a motel site, has been targeted as a potential stormwater pond location for the project. In talking with a neighborhood police officer, you learn that the motel is largely serving as long-term housing for low-income persons. You hear similar accounts from an agency that provides social services to clients in the area. Although these renter households represent a very small percentage of the census block group, the high adverse effect of losing an affordable place to live as a result of the project could be considered disproportionate. Keep in mind that environmental justice determinations are based on effects, not population size. We should be tuned in to the comparative impact of the project among population groups in the area. During a project evaluation, we must also be attentive to the potential for discrimination against any person or group on the basis of age, sex, religion, national origin, and disability as required by Title VI and related non-discrimination legislation. These considerations encompass the distribution of transportation benefits and impacts as well as access to the project decision-making process. Title VI, for example, prohibits national origin discrimination. Thus, the Act has implications for engaging limited English proficient populations through accessible project information. And, as highlighted in the first video of this training, it is important to note that the requirements of Title VI extend to all programs and activities of agencies receiving federal aid, including their projects that are not federally funded. The geographic focus of environmental justice analysis is the project study area, which can vary in size depending on the environmental issue or effect being evaluated. For example, the study area for potential relocations might be more focused around the project footprint, whereas the study area for community cohesion effects could be much broader. The same holds true for the environmental justice effect area, which encompasses an environmental justice population having potential for at least one adverse human health or environmental effect as a consequence of the project. The geographic extent of one effect may differ from another, so a project could have multiple EJ effect areas. To illustrate, this slide shows a project study area. Census block groups are outlined in black. Those block groups determined to have an EJ population are shown in pink. Potential effects, in this case potential relocations, are represented by the aqua boxes. Where these boxes, the potential effect footprint, and an environmental justice population coincide, is an EJ effect area. Another geographic area used in environmental justice analysis is the reference community. The reference community's demographic profile is a frame for comparison of how potential effects are distributed among population groups in the study area. The reference community population is sometimes referred to as the general population. A reference community's relevancy to the study area population decreases with distance from the project. When selecting a reference community, it's best to use the smallest political unit or units encompassing the study area, such as an incorporated city or town. If the study area is located in an unincorporated area of the county, a census unit, such as a census-designated place or county subdivision, can be used. Political units or census units are used because important information needed for your analysis is reported by the census. The affected community should be given an integral role in identifying project-related issues, verifying and assigning value to community resources, identifying impactful past actions, suggesting ways to resolve impacts, and negotiating avoidance, minimization, mitigation, and enhancement strategies. By including affected environmental justice groups in project planning and development, the greater the potential for equitable and context-sensitive outcomes. This concludes Part 2 of Facilitating Equitable Outcomes. To learn about a methodology for environmental justice analysis, be sure to view the third module of this training. This and other SCE-related resources are available on the department's website at the address shown. Links to resources referenced in this video are listed on the next slide. Thank you for viewing this production of the Florida Department of Transportation.